Are you thinking about taking a gap year but don't know where to begin? Hi, that's me, Julia Rogers. I'm a professional gap year counselor. Yes, that's a thing. And today we're going to talk about how to plan a gap year in 2025. I'm going to go over what a gap year is, what the benefits are, how to get started with planning, and tips and tricks to how to plan an amazing year out. So let's get into it.
Okay, first I want to start with a definition. A gap year is an intentional period of personal growth and exploration supported by activities of experiential learning. So what does that mean exactly? Well, gap years have been around for a really long time. They've been a rite of passage since the 1960s, and you can actually trace the kind of roots of a gap year back even further to indigenous and Aboriginal cultures. So this idea of intentional wandering and personal growth as part of you're growing into adulthood has actually been around for eons. And it's really come into the modern nomenclature in America in the past 10 years or so. But it's growing in popularity. More and more young people are choosing to take an intentional gap year, either after high school, sometime during their college experience, or sometimes even between higher education and the workforce, or guess what, even during careers as well. So there's no wrong time to take a gap year, but I personally feel like the most impactful time to take a gap year is after high school. Now, for me personally, I took a gap year after college and I went to Tanzania for almost a year. I did public health outreach. I had an absolutely transformative experience. But when I got home, I wished I had taken it before college so that it would inform my college experience. I can tell you from personal experience, I would have been more mature. I would have changed my major. I would have done a whole bunch of stuff about my college education differently. And that's why I feel so strongly about people just having these kinds of experiences and getting out there into the world, but also using a gap year as a tool to inform your education, the type of college or higher education that you need and want, as well as kind of helping you prepare to make the most of your college experience. So sometimes I hear from students that they're a little bit nervous about taking a gap year because they're worried that it's still kind of an uncommon thing to do. But I can tell you that it's really been growing in popularity, especially since the pandemic. And also because a lot of students are opting to take a gap year to learn more about themselves and the world around them. And one thing that we're finding as far as outcomes from gap year students is that gap years are exceptionally good at helping young people discover who they are, their priorities, their values, and what they want out of the next steps of their education or career. So what we find is that 95% of students who take a gap year, they survey that they feel better prepared for their next step as a direct result of their gap year. We also find that the same amount of students, about 97%, say that their gap year increased their confidence as well as their maturity. And 84% say that they feel like they are more employable as a result of their gap year. So these are incredible benefits as far as that personal experience and how it can inform your adult life. We also find from studies done at Middlebury and UNC Chapel Hill that gap year students actually outperform traditional students academically. So contrary to this belief that if you take a gap year, you might fall off the academic track, we actually find that students who take a gap year and take that time out from the classroom experience are actually performing better once they get to college. And a lot of colleges say that they also see students being more involved in college activities and more engaged as students. So colleges actually think very highly of gap years, especially if they're well done and intentional, which is what we talk about when we talk about taking an intentional gap year. So when it comes to actually planning a gap year, it's quite different than the college admissions process. When you're applying to college, you're formulating yourself into a profile that's asking an institution of higher education to accept you. A gap year is kind of the complete opposite in the best way possible because it really asks you, how do you want to grow? How do you want to learn? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And that can be both really exciting and empowering and also a little bit intimidating at the outset. So if you want to boil down planning a gap year, it really comes down to 3 words: dream, define, design. So when you are a junior or a senior in high school and you're kind of getting more serious about your gap year plans, but still in that early stage, you really want to dream. You want to start brainstorming the types of opportunities you might want to explore, where you might want to go in our country or in the world, and also starting to think about your budget and how much you might need to save to do the things you want to do. Then when it gets a little bit closer, usually kind of first or second semester, senior year, kind of edging towards graduation, that's where you want to start defining your actual goals for your gap time. I like to subdivide goals into personal, practical, and professional. So that means that you're doing something for yourself, the personal stuff, things you just want to do for fun, your hobbies that you want to deepen, new things you want to try that you've never gotten to experience, that kind of thing. The practical goals are going to be life skills things. So gaining independence, working on social skills, getting your driver's license, all of those things that'll help you adult in the real world. And then the professional stuff or pre-professional stuff is going to be anything that you can do to explore potential career paths. And the idea here is not to know exactly what you want to be when you grow up at the end of your gap year, because let's be honest, like your career journey is a journey. It's not something that you end up at. But a gap year can be utilized to uncover your strengths, what you enjoy doing, the kind of lifestyle that you want to lead, which is so informative as to what you plan to study or how you want to utilize your education. So thinking about your pre-professional goals as part of your overall gap year plan is a really good idea. So after define comes design. Design is when you actually start choosing the activities that you do with your gap year and plan for that progression of experiences. And by that, I mean that most gap year students actually do multiple things over the course of their year. So they won't just do one thing for the whole, year and almost year and a half of their gap time, if you're talking about graduation to matriculation. But they might do work at home during the summer and save money, go away in the fall and do a structured program, come home for the holidays, go away again and do an internship or volunteer work, come back home at late spring and stay at home and work again for the summer before college or something along those lines. So when you're designing your itinerary, you're going to be choosing programs, activities, experiences that support your goals, fit within your budget, and really help you break out of your comfort zone, because that's where the magic happens. So let's talk for a little bit about the types of things that you can fill your gap year with, because I guarantee you there's way more out there than you realize initially. There are so many things you can do on a gap year. It starts to get exciting when you really start investigating all the different opportunities. So I will use some visuals to help us illustrate this, because it's easier to understand gap year opportunities in two categories: programs and self-designed opportunities. So when it comes to programs, this is kind of how it sounds. This is something that you join that gives you some structure, that gives you some support. So these are great opportunities for people who want to opt into a program that usually has a group where you're going to be with other peers or other people, and that gives you some sort of learning / growth / structure to your days, so that you kind of don't have to figure it all out on your own. The most common type of gap year opportunity, if you're Googling for gap year opportunities, is experiential semesters. These are going to be structured group-based programs where you're with leaders and you're structuring your time around some sort of activity. So you might be doing something outdoorsy, like doing a semester in the American West where you rock climb and whitewater raft and learn how to hike in the backcountry. You might be doing something that's more about cultural immersion, where you go to Southeast Asia and learn about elephant conservation and go stay with local homestay families and get to scuba dive. You might be doing something that's more language immersion focused, where you're living in a city and learning Spanish and getting to live with a host family. So all of these things are still kind of the same model of programming, but they are different thematically. So if you want to do that type of program, but wonder if it's in a certain area of the world or under a certain banner or theme, chances are it is. There's stuff in the outdoors, there's stuff in the arts, there's stuff in language learning and cultural immersion and adventure travel. All of those things are well covered in that category. Now, volunteering is another really great way to spend some or all of your gap year. There are volunteer opportunities all over the world where you can really make impactful change in certain communities through either conservation work or working with wildlife, which is very common, or working with people in community-based volunteer opportunities, such as teaching English, working alongside people in community centers or childcare centers, doing work around microfinance, doing work around elder care, all sorts of things. So when it comes to volunteering, you want to invest as much time as possible in a local community or at a project site so you can make the most impact. And you also want to make sure you watch out for, thoughtfully executed and ethical types of volunteer work, which I can talk about in another video if you're interested. There's also interning, which you may think about interning as not necessarily programmatic, but it actually can be. So interning programs actually help set you up with a professional placement. And sometimes these are in international cities. So you can go to places like Dublin, Ireland, Bangkok, Thailand, Cape Town, South Africa, and actually get work experience with some really legitimate organizations and companies, and living in, accommodation, usually apartments with other, gap year college age students. These are really great programs for those who really want to explore some career paths on their gap time. The common length for those is usually around 1 to 4 months, depending on the program. We also have national service, which is such an amazing way to give back to our own communities here in the US. Now, if you're a US citizen, you can join a lot of different AmeriCorps programs. They're usually longer term, so usually, 9 to 12 months long, depending on the program, like City Year or NCCC. But then there are shorter options sometimes as well, where you can work in disaster relief or working in construction slash home building, those kinds of things. And then there's also some really great conservation corps where you can go and learn how to build trails in some of our public lands in the States. These are all fully funded opportunities, meaning that you don't have to pay for them. In fact, you get a living stipend as well as an educational award that you can put towards post-secondary education at the end of your service. So such a good option. Lastly, we have enrichment courses. And this is a great opportunity if there's a specific skill that you want to learn. So maybe you want to learn how to surf, or maybe you want to take a coding boot camp, or maybe you want to learn art in Italy. Anything along those lines can be accommodated. And usually these courses are, different lengths depending on the type of skill you're learning. You may be doing studio art in Italy for a week, or you may be doing a whole month learning about, wildland firefighting, something along those lines. So many different opportunities in that category. So thinking about what you actually want to learn is a good starting point when coming to conclusions about what types of programs are going to best support you. So now I want to move on to self-designed opportunities. These are going to be not programmatic. These are going to be things that you have to make happen for yourself. So these are great for people who are kind of self-motivated gappers, people who already have some travel experience under their belt, people who are gapping with friends and have buddies who they can bring with them on some of these adventures, that kind of thing. So first up is kind of the quintessential gap year activity, traveling. I can't tell you how many of my students are deciding to do independent travel at some point during their gap year. A lot of them do it actually in the spring of their gap time. So maybe they'll do a couple programs and then they end their gap year by traveling with friends that they've met along the way, or friends from back home after their first year of college is over. So whether it's, Eurorailing in Europe, or backpacking in Southeast Asia, or traveling in South America, or whatever it is, thinking about your budget, thinking about health and safety, thinking about your logistics is really important, but lots of people can have successful independent travel experiences on their gap year. Similarly, work exchange is a really popular way to do low-cost gapping. So work exchange is where you actually work and give your labor in exchange for free room and board. So there are different platforms that support this activity. Maybe you've heard of Woofing or Workaway. That's work exchange opportunities. So you have to join a website, become a member, create a profile, and then start reaching out to hosts. And there's kind of a direct one-to-one match. Another type of really cost-effective gap year opportunity is working. So you can work locally, but a lot of people will do destination work, where you go away and work, where you work someplace that has employee housing. I would highly recommend this if you're in a situation where you are self-funding your gap year or need to make some money, because there's a limited amount of ways that you can grow if you're living in your childhood bedroom and working a local job. But if you could go out to Aspen or Sedona, Arizona, or Alaska and work a season as in the hospitality world and live in other employee housing and have those independent skills, you're going to be so much more mature as a result of that. So think about destination work, not only in the US, but you can also, as a gapper, legally get working holiday visas in Australia, New Zealand, and some other places as well. But those are the main ones. Canada, you can, but there's a lottery system. Once you're matriculated into college, it opens up to a few more countries. But again, for just your traditional gap year students, those three countries are the most popular. If you are lucky enough to have dual citizenship, there may be many more opportunities available to you. So check on that. So for those of you who are staying local during your gap year, you can still make it really meaningful. You can seek out work opportunities, interning, other types of experiences like job shadowing that are close by, but can still help you discover more about yourself. A meaningful gap year doesn't mean you're flinging yourself across the world necessarily, but you do need to be finding ways in which you are stretching yourself. So a gap year is only a gap year if you are stretching, growing, learning, and are somewhat uncomfortable for parts of it. So think about that when you're thinking about, am I doing enough on my gap year? Lastly, a lot of people will pursue personal projects on their gap time. Maybe you've always wanted to write a one-woman show and produce it at a local theater. Maybe there's an art project that you want to pursue. Maybe you want to start a business or a nonprofit. A gap year is an excellent time to experiment with those kinds of things. The outcome can be amazing. So I would encourage you to think about if there's any personal projects or things that you want to accomplish on your gap time that you can use a little bit of time during your year to pursue. Let's talk for a minute about budget. Sometimes people say that they think a gap year has to be expensive, and couldn't be further from the truth. It really depends on who you are and what your needs are for your gap year. If you're the type of person who needs a lot of support or needs the type of program where there's going to be mentorship, mental health support, or if you're going to be doing something that's high risk in the outdoors, you're going to want to invest in programming that keeps you safe, that keeps you healthy, that helps you grow in the ways that you need to grow so that you can thrive in your steps after your gap time. If you want and need to take a low cost gap year, that is completely possible as well. There are many students who do low cost, no cost, or cost positive gap years. And you just really need to think thoughtfully about how you design your itinerary. So some things to consider when it comes to costs are, the programmatic costs. A lot of the program types that we discussed in the earlier part of the video, those are going to be an investment anywhere from a few $100s a month to thousands of dollars a month, depending on the type of program and how much structure it offers. There's also going to be vaccines, visas, kind of, those kinds of extra expenses, gear that you might need, as well as extra health costs like health insurance and travel insurance and things like that. But the good news is there's also ways to financially fund your gap year. You can work and save for ahead of your gap time or during your gap time. Oftentimes people's families are willing to contribute. So that's a good conversation to have with the people in your life who may be able to support you in some ways. Consider that not all forms of support are dollars and cents. You may have an aunt who lives someplace cool who you want to go visit and work with, or live with on your gap time and work a local job while living with her. I've had students who've done au pairing, which is nannying in foreign countries because their parents have a family friend who has kids who needs help. So thinking about your network and how that network might be able to be of use to you during your gap time is a really useful way about thinking about how to also save some money in different ways. So do some brainstorming on that. There's also financial aid and scholarships available for many gap year programs. So if you are looking into a specific gap year program, be sure to also look into their financial aid and scholarship opportunities. You can also often use 529 money, which is college savings money, towards gap year programs that bear college credit. So many structured gap year programs are actually accredited by different universities like Portland State University and others. So be sure to look into that if you're interested in using 529 money towards gap year experiences, which bonus, you get college credit as part of your gap year, which is pretty great. It doesn't always transfer into your future college, but it can be a great way to help fund it. And then potentially you have credits to transfer in as well. So when it comes to thinking about how your gap year relates to your college experience, I have some tips. First of all, if you know that you're bound to a 4-year college after your gap year, the best thing that you can do is apply to college senior year and then defer from your school of choice. Many 4-year schools allow deferrals for an intentional gap year. Usually the process is that you get in, so you'd get an admittance letter, in spring of your senior year, and then you would write a letter or a proposal about why you want to take a gap year, what you plan to do, and how it will make you a better student. You submit that along with your deposit for that institution, and then they would grant you a 1-year deferral, meaning that you'd have your gap year. You wouldn't have to reapply to colleges on your year, and you could just, execute your plan. That's the easiest way to tie in your gap year with a 4-year college experience. I have found that since the pandemic, more and more students are using their gap year to figure out what they want to do for college or where they want to go to school. So it's also completely possible to, apply for college on your gap year as well. You just have to think about the timing, what types of materials you need to collect ahead of time, and if you're going to be away during that fall, during application season, how to make sure that you get your apps in on time. So just needs a little bit of planning, but definitely possible. One thing that you want to also look into as you're preparing, these applications and things like that is your financial aid packages. You will have to reapply for FAFSA funding on your gap year even if you defer. So you will get a different financial FAFSA package after your gap year. So that needs to be a family conversation. Similarly, with merit scholarships and other types of scholarships that are in-house from the college that you may get into, those can sometimes be deferred along with your admission, or sometimes they may change. So you want to be clear on that before you commit to taking a gap year. A lot of people ask me if it's okay to ask a college about their deferral policies or if they're gap year friendly. And the answer is, of course you can. You can ask during a tour, you can go on their website and see if they have their deferral policy publicly listed, or just call the admissions office and ask. It never hurts to just ask some questions about gap years. Most colleges, find them, very positive experiences. Let's talk about Onward resources for you now that you're definitely interested in taking gap time. First of all, I would encourage you to find someone out there who you know or a friend of a friend who's taken gap time. They are the best advocates. They can tell you about their experience. And even though their experience won't be exactly like your experience, it'll still give you that confidence and that boost that you might need to take the leap. So definitely talk to Gap Year alums. If you don't know any Gap Year alums, feel free to check out the podcast Gap Year Radio, which I co-host with a friend, or the Gap Year Association's alumni videos, both of which are great examples of students who've taken gap time who are excited to talk about it and offer great advice and great insights and great stories. Similarly, you can go to the Gap Year Association website where you can find program listings, a student planning guide, and all sorts of other resources to help you with your gap year planning and execution. Go Overseas is another wonderful resource. It's kind of like the Yelp of gap years. There's all sorts of peer reviews of different gap year programs and opportunities. And lastly, I'm a resource. I'm a gap year counselor. I work directly with students and their families to help plan gap year experiences. And if you are interested in having a free introductory conversation, I'll drop the link in the show notes, but you can also contact me that way, fill out a questionnaire, and we'll have an intro conversation. I can brainstorm with you about your ideas and how we might be able to work together to make them happen. I hope that this video was really helpful as you start to get to know the gap year process. Good luck, and I hope that you have a great adventure.